All right, welcome everybody to the final session of Startup Week Hartford. I'm really happy to be here as a moderator for this panel. In a second, I'll kind of tell you why this is like a full circle experience for me at this point, doing this panel and kind of talking with everybody here. But I just want to start off and just saying, a thank you for all the hard work for Launch Hartford, everybody involved there. The track captains, the panelists and moderators, Techstars, and all the people that came to the event. This Startup Week is all about bringing people together, hearing what is happening with other startups and innovations, and just bringing people together for collaboration. And I think that this session today will kind of highlight a little bit of that and so forth. So again, just want to thank everybody for coming and participating and so forth. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Eric Francis. I am a Senior Engagement Manager here at Techstars. I'm also a lifelong Connecticut resident. I am a CEO of Trifecta Ecosystems here in Connecticut. And the reason why this is full circle to me is that I actually read a book a few years ago called Startup Communities by Brad Feld. And that book inspired me to kind of dig into Connecticut and do things around here to kind of help prop up the ecosystem, just like Michelle and hundreds of other people have over the past 10 years. And so, the Startup Community Way, which we're going to kind of highlight in a minute, is the next evolution of startup communities, which Ian is a co-author of, and so forth. So without further ado, I'll introduce the panelists. So we have Michelle Cote, Launch Program Director. We have Ian Hathaway, Senior Director of Ecosystem Development at Techstars, and also co-author of the Startup Community Way. And then Laila Partridge, who is the MD for the STANLEY Techstars Accelerator here in Hartford. So I would just want to start, Michelle, if you just kind of want to let everybody go around and kind of give an introduction of themselves, kind of their experience, and then we'll just hop into it. So Michelle, if you want to start this off. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was trying to be considerate just in case we had background noise from being at home, but thank you for bringing that to my attention. My name is Michelle Cote. I'm lucky enough to lead an effort here in Hartford, Connecticut called Launch Hartford. It's really the culmination of the community coming together and deciding that we want to work together to make Hartford, Connecticut the best place on the East Coast to start or grow a business. And I feel so fortunate that we have great partnerships with our private sector and on our anchor industries, our higher ed community, and our community organizations to be able to make that happen. So thrilled to partner with Techstars to put Hartford on the map with Startup Week Hartford, and to continue to unlock opportunities from here. So thanks for having me, Eric.
It's great to have you. Laila.
My name is Laila Partridge, and I am the Managing Director for the STANLEY Accelerator. So Techstars works closely with STANLEY on looking for companies that are doing interesting things in manufacturing. And of course, Hartford has many manufacturing leaders, and it's a terrific place to bring these companies in when we're in person and really help them be part of the community. And Michelle and I have talked a lot about how we can develop various things in the community. The types of things that I bring to the table in terms of conversations are probably old. I was at Intel Capital during the formative years, so happy to talk a little bit about how corporations begin to think about investing in startups. We started initially in terms of the supply chain. We'll talk more about that if you're interested. And fast forwarding to seeing kind of what STANLEY, which is kind of the current instantiation of how you look at innovation from the corporate side, is thinking about it. And one of the things we did at Intel, which I'm happy to talk more about, is that when we got really excited about seeing the opportunity for ecosystem building, we actually sent people out all over the world to start creating ecosystems. And so I can talk a little bit about how my colleague at the time, Carlos Corcoran, went down to Latin America and South America. And this is 20 years ago, and there really was nothing there. And now we have a very vibrant community. So happy to share my thoughts there as well. I'm excited to be here. Thank you, everyone.
Ian, take it away.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction, Eric. Yeah, so as you said, I get to work on developing ecosystems around the world on behalf of Techstars. I co-authored this book, which encapsulates a lot of my thinking. Hopefully, we're bringing that into the real world. I think one of the things that, I could just say about my background that's useful for lessons is that, that entrepreneurs can come from anywhere. I don't mean everywhere. Not everyone will be an entrepreneur, but anyone could be an entrepreneur. And that place really matters. I wouldn't have predicted 15 years ago that I would be working with entrepreneurs, that I would have been an entrepreneur. I'm an economist by training, and I was working at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Very different domain. It wasn't working for me, and I happened to be in a place where lots of that stuff was happening. And that's how I found my way into the wonderful world of startups and technology. And so, and so that's like, I think that's an important theme to weave into this discussion today. And it's personal to me, right?
That's awesome. And the background of every entrepreneur is different, right? And so they bring different ideas and theories and so forth, which you're a perfect example for. So, so great. So let's kind of kick this off. And, I just wanted to kind of start off with a question that I'd love to hear all of your opinions on. And it's also kind of like a way to kind of just check in, because, this year has been tough on everybody. And it's been changing how people think about going about their work and thinking about entrepreneurship and so forth. So is there anything that in 2020 that you have changed your mind on in terms of the way you're going about your work or the way you're thinking about the work that you're doing? And Michelle, if you want to start.
Thanks, Eric. I'm not sure that there's anything that I've changed my mind about, but I think that there's probably a couple of things that have been reinforced, right? And one of those is just how interdependent we all are. The fact that, what we all do impacts each other has been brought to a head, or has been emphasized by the fact that, in a pandemic, we really need to take care of each other and prevent each other from getting sick. But even when a pandemic isn't happening, our actions have an impact on others. And I think that it's really important to kind of realize that and underscore that, especially in a community like Hartford that's so tight knit. So, positive work has an impact on people, and negative work has an impact on people, and never kind of forgetting that the way that you do what you do can have either a positive or negative effect, I think is been really kind of at the forefront of my mind. The other thing is, there's this Marine Corps kind of motto of improvise, adapt, overcome. And I think that it's probably relevant to entrepreneurs as well, and innovators, like always trying to take a look at what's changing in the world around you. You're never in control of it, but when you take the time to understand it, and when it's not going your way, improvise, adapt, and overcome. We've certainly been working on that and practicing that no matter where we sit in the world and what we're doing over the past 7 months. And I think that type of orientation, that type of mindset is probably going to be more and more important for all of us, and no matter what we're doing as we go forward. So I'm hoping that a little bit of that innovative spirit is kind of transcending the rest of the world and helping us to think about how to roll with the things that come our way, and potentially unlock great new things as a result of it. So a couple of things on my mind.
I'd like to pick up on some themes there that I think are really interesting. And the first one I would say is really this notion that we stopped thinking about how we interact. We started thinking differently of how we interact with people. And I remember Marty Guay, who's one of the folks I work with at Stanley, sort of said, at the beginning of the pandemic, you had this mindset, you're on the video and you hear a dog barking. You're like, oh, that's so unprofessional. But fast forward 3 months and now you're like, so what's the name of the dog? What kind of dog is that, right? And you're starting to have a very different interaction. And the way I kind of see it, evolving is also that it has forced people who have traditionally not been virtual in very traditional industries. And I sit on the board of Cambridge Trust, and into all their employees were virtual or capable of working virtually pre-pandemic. And they very quickly flipped to 98%. And it had a fundamental change in how they started thinking about their peers and their colleagues and how they wanted to interact. So what you're seeing is kind of these technology implications, these work-life balance implications that I think are beginning to really result in a different way of thinking about your colleagues and who you work with. caring for them during, this notion that they might get sick. I just think it's a really interesting sort of development in business and how people start thinking about taking care of their colleagues and people that work with them. And I look at that always, those kinds of trends as opportunities. I think that Ian has talked a lot about collaboration, and this is a different way of thinking about collaboration. And we will need better tools virtually, and we will need to think about the implications of the existing infrastructure, like the real estate businesses. Are we really going to have them as vibrant post this crisis? Because people are now saying, well, there are different ways of working. And so there's going to be a trickle down in a lot of places. And whenever there's those kind of changes, I think innovation occurs because people step in and say, hey, let's think about this way. And so it's kind of a good, bad news, that kind of commentary, but one that is kind of fun to watch from the outside.
Mm-hmm. And Michelle, you made a valid point, is that some stuff hasn't changed, but this process has reinforced a lot of things for some people. And so Ian, the book came out right at the beginning of this. So like what happened? Did you guys have to adapt the book to this, or were there things that actually reinforced the book going through this year?
Yeah, that word Michelle used, reinforced. Like, I feel like that's more what I'm thinking about this. Well, I had to adapt my life. My family, we did a international move in 48 hours because of the pandemic. So that's a whole other vector, but it's important on a bunch of these other dimensions, right? So I feel like, and I'll get to your question about the book in a minute, but one of the most important things for me is that I feel like this is drawing out the humanity of the people we work with. I have never liked this idea of work persona, personal persona, to a degree, obviously. But I think this has been a positive thing to see our colleagues, to see our customers as humans, right? You're in someone's house. Now we can talk about how there have been some other bad parts about that, but that's a really important thing for me. I also think we're going to appreciate that connectedness even more. I think community is more important than ever. And we'll see that gratitude on the other side of this. As it relates to the book, I mean, we were in the final throes of submitting, like, the, once you have a final draft, then it goes into this bulky sort of software, and then it's hard to edit from there. We were in those stages. And really, there's a good story behind this. So my co-author Brad has written many books. This was my first book. So I was really excited about going on tour and talking to folks about this, meeting people. So I was super bummed when it became very obvious what was happening. Brad was like, no, you're seeing this entirely the wrong way. We wrote this book. We take a systems view, in particular complex adaptive systems, to explain the behavior of startup communities and entrepreneurial ecosystems. Little bit of an abstract concept, right? Especially for people unfamiliar with systems thinking, systems science. I hope we've done a good job of explaining that in a way that's tangible and relatable to this topic. But the point being that it would be unfamiliar to many people. And we were living through something that is a complex adaptive system, which was this unfolding public health crisis. Many of the concepts we describe in the book are directly relevant. So Brad's point was, no, this is going to be so much easier for people to absorb now. This is a great thing. How that physically manifests, it was going through the book in certain periods, certain places where we would talk about concepts such as nonlinear transformations. I don't know if you remember back in March when this was unfolding, it seemed like things were decaying so fast that the human mind had a hard time processing it. Well, guess what? Entrepreneurial ecosystems evolve in a similar way. There are huge delays between an action and when those results can be seen, and on and on and on. And I imagine we'll talk about some of those behaviors today, but really it was plugging in little, phrases like, or a sentence where we talk about a concept and we say, this may become familiar as the COVID crisis unfolds. Maybe there are 7 such instances, but it didn't change anything for us in a fundamental way. In fact, it severely reinforced what we were thinking.
Yep. Sometimes current events help you do that, right? And living through it helps a little bit too. So Michelle, I don't know if you remember this, but about 10 years ago, you were actually moderating a panel that I was on, and you brought it was down in Bridgeport. So again, full circle, a decade later. And so being like a longtime actor and leader in this space, and having a vision for what needs to get done and so forth. What are the biggest changes that have happened over the past 5, 10 years to where we are now? Because I kind of want to kind of give a little bit of context of like how far we've come, so we understand where we can go in the next 5 to 10 years. So
Yeah, thanks for bringing me back to that, Eric. So fun, and I feel fortunate that our paths have intersected so many times in the last 10 years. From you being a participant in programs at Reset, and so on and so on. But I really kind of got my start in thinking about how to develop an innovation ecosystem here in the city of Hartford, based on my experience trying to launch a venture in this city. It's been my home. I am a proud UConn grad, times two. My family has been in Connecticut for a really long time. As I looked around, this is the place that I wanted to be. But I struggled as an entrepreneur to figure out how to find a couple of things. One was a peer group that understood the things that I was trying to do, and respected that and could identify. I mean, it was as simple as a group of people that I could vent to about certain things, and they would be able to nod knowingly, or let me know that it was okay, it was temporary, I could get through it, right? Instead of kind of looking at me like I have no idea what you're talking about, and quite frankly, it's scaring me. So can we talk about something else, right? To being able to connect with people who understood the things that I was trying to do from a business perspective, and could provide actionable advice and support to be able to make that happen. So that experience was amazing. The venture did not kind of turn out the way that I thought it would at the beginning, right? Which is kind of a common refrain that many of us who are addicted to the process can recite at some point in our journey. But after that happened, I felt like I came away with all of these lessons about what I could have, should have done, or maybe what would have been helpful to be able to prevent some of the walls that I crashed into. And I became really passionate about trying to figure out how to save other people from those headaches and those heartaches, because that's what it really is at the end of the day. It's a heartache because you want to see something appear in the world that you believe so deeply in, and to see it fall apart for logistical reasons, or for overlooking something, is just like the worst feeling in the world, right? So the process of trying to figure out how to set up those peer networks, and how to set up programs that would help people foreshadow and foresee, and get the support that they needed to be able to avoid some of those pitfalls, was something that was really attractive to me. And 10 years ago in Connecticut, that was a novel concept. I felt like I was back in my entrepreneur seat, where nobody really understood what I was trying to do and why it was important. But today, I just say, what we're trying to do is make Hartford, Connecticut the best place on the East Coast to build or grow a business, right? And people are like, oh, cool, I can do this. I want to jump in and be able to do this over here. Tell me more, right? So there's an enthusiasm, not only from the outside coming in, that there's some special assets that are in this community that I don't think that people really recognize before, but there's also this recognition from inside the community that this is a place that that can do that, that can be that amazing kind of fostering space for people that are trying to do big things. And there's so many members of the community that want to do their part to make that happen. So the fact that we have our insurance leaders, Aetna, Cigna, Travelers, the Hartford, all co-investing and making this happen, and figuring out how we can be a significant center of insurtech is amazing. The fact that we have Stanley Black & Decker that is headquartered here in the state, and says we want to create an example for other places, and do it here, even though they've got manufacturing assets and supply chain and all over the world, but to do it here in our home state is a tremendous kind of vote of confidence in that direction. Our healthcare institutions are also saying, you know, this is the path forward for us. And so just to see the fact that there's excitement in our city and in our community, and people that are as diverse as accountants and actuaries to marketing folks to our legal and lawyer, you know, IP professionals, all of the folks that kind of that magic mix, technologists to be able to make it happen, are finding each other and are actively searching to be able to make that happen, is a little bit of a dream come true. So I'm very excited about where we've been able to get as a community in the last 10 years. And I'm even more excited about how we can continue to provide, or like maybe like fan the sparks and the small flames that have started to erupt a little bit, and you know, grow this thing into something that's probably bigger and more amazing than I could even imagine at this point.
You know, I'd love to pick up on some themes there in terms of the corporate side. And I'm really, really curious to see Ian's comments about kind of that ecosystem development piece as well. But, you know, when I look at kind of corporations, a lot of them have really changed how they think about startups. And it's happened very dramatically, very quickly. Some companies like, you know, Intel and Stanley have an incredibly well thought through, structured set of programs, lots of prongs, lots of collaboration internally. You know, Stanley Ventures does later stage deals. Stanley X in Silicon Valley does incubation and new internal idea growth. The accelerator looks globally for startups that are relevant, and they all kind of collaborate amongst each other. But fundamental to all of that is this notion that there's a recognition by large corporations that what they're good at is different than what the innovation community is good at. And that there needs to be a series of ways in which to engage and to think about it. And that it isn't done by a command and control kind of, you know, I'm going to pluck and buy this company and incorporate it and then we're done. But that there's this beginning of looking at different ways of doing it. And so I see not only just the things that you're talking about where the insurance industry is coming together for Hartford, but I also see in the Midwest, a bunch of kind of small $1 billion plus smaller kind of manufacturers putting money together in a fund so that somebody's looking out for their interests for innovation, so they see it. So across all of kind of, you know, the United States and elsewhere, Ian can comment probably better than I can, there seems to be a bunch of trends where people are recognizing it's about collaboration, and it's about kind of extending reach as opposed to command and control. It's about looking at kind of where all these dispersed little, you know, systems are emerging and tapping into them and supporting them. And I think that's really exciting. And I've not seen it really that broadly before. So I find it as something that if we can bridge it and make it more successful through programs like what Michelle's doing and others, I think it's cool.
Yeah. And so, oh, Ian, go.
The only thing I was going to say on that point, Laila, was that, you know, the word you used was engage. I think the more that corporates are engaging with startups and meeting them where they are, they're learning about the entrepreneurial process. And then from there, figuring out how they can actually plug in, right? There's a great story of this. We didn't keep it in our book. We moved it over to the second edition of Brad's 2012 book. It's a story of like sort of almost a transformation that Barclays had in the many years it was partnering through a corporate accelerator at Techstars. At first, it was sort of this, you know, little thing, this cute little project over here in the innovation team. You know, then people started taking it more seriously. It started being a part of people's jobs. And then, you know, over time, it developed into this thing where, you know, a good portion of the company was really bought into this as an imperative, not just for Barclays, but for the communities, right? And so I think that word engagement is key because it is a fundamentally different orientation. And as you become more familiarized with it, just like anything, then you start to see how it serves you and how you can serve it.
And I think the engagement's hard. I mean, I want to really emphasize because that's where I think I spend most of my time. And most of my time is in bridging and sort of saying, okay, who are the people that this one little startup or these 10 little startups should be talking to? And let's put it in an environment where both of them understand the expectations of those conversations and can have a productive discussion, right? Because if someone is coming from the mindset of, oh, I'm talking to this startup because they're going to be my vendor and I have a 100 list checklist that they have to have this and that and everything else, first of all, no startup I know can come forth with anything that's going to meet those requirements. And the second is, it's the wrong mindset. And so a lot of times I'm sort of setting the stage, setting the expectations, making sure that people in the room have the right level of, understanding of how the conversation flows and the expectations, where the startup wants the big company to write a check in the next month, and the big company doesn't even communicate across it. It's all various different silos and other places in that time period. So it's really setting expectations and trying to find a way that those conversations can be productive and at the right level at the right time too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of on a little bit on that thread, in the book, Ian, you kind of talk about the different types of capital, right? And what they mean to an ecosystem. Can you kind of just go a little bit into that, and kind of how you kind of view the different types of capital, and like at different stages, are certain types of capital more important than others for an ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, so the 7 capitals is this framework that we provide. For me, I think of it as a thought exercise. It's to push people to be creative and not latch on to this one thing, which is financial capital, right? We hear this literally everywhere. Well, if only we had more capital in this community, then X, Y, and Z would happen. And because we don't have that, because we don't have enough capital, we don't have these things. That's the reason. That would solve it all. This is in no way, shape, or form to diminish those concerns. Like, especially in certain geographies, there is a very real imbalance between supply and demand. But that's always going to be the case to a degree. And oftentimes complaining about it won't help. So our point of this framework is to say, well, many factors, many resources are important to a thriving startup community. And boy, they sound a lot like capital, right? They're assets that can be used to produce value. They're degradable, right? They need upkeep, and they're forward-looking. Wouldn't it be nice if we framed this in the terminology of capital to kind of like kill 2 birds with 1 stone here, right? To explain the nature of these assets and to also sort of challenge this conventional thinking around financial capital, which has been synonymous with venture and angel capital. So we talk about intellectual capital, technologies, ideas, R&D, that kind of thing. Human capital, which is skills and talent. Financial capital, we've discussed. Physical capital, which is just think of it as a catch-all for like infrastructure and quality of place. Institutional capital, everything from the laws to the legal system, which in certain countries that can be an enormous challenge. Actually, same thing with what I just said about physical infrastructure, something we can take for granted in the United States. And then some of the institutional actors. And the final 2 are critical, cultural capital and network capital, right? Network capital is about how all of these things are coming together, and cultural capital, for me, permeates it all. And so the point here being that we're just trying to challenge this and say, look, all of these things matter, focus on them. Oh, and by the way, governments in particular, some of these factors are purely in their lane, right? So, I've seen it time and again where governments want to engage by providing the service rather than empowering the existing actors in the ecosystem, right? And that may be perfectly well and good, depending on the local circumstances. I want to stress how important the circumstances of each time and place are super important here. But one of the things that we discussed, there are certain things that are purely within the lane of government that like no one else can do, right? So getting that kind of house in order, right? From like, we want to talk about regulation and tax, that falls into our institutional capital, right? Quality of place, is your city safe? Do people with options about where they want to live, do they want to be here, right? And so I could probably rant on this for a long time. I'll just leave it there, but it's just a framework that we provided so that people can think more deeply about this. It's somewhat memorable, and we wanted to like kind of highlight the fact, that these are assets, and they should be treated as such.
So Michelle, I don't know about you, but going back to the early days where we're talking about entrepreneurship and startups, and people are like, yeah, there's no money around here. There's no venture capital. You got to go to this ecosystem, to that ecosystem. I'm hearing less and less of that. Obviously, I still talk to some people that are like, yeah, I need to go raise some money to do X, Y, and Z. But for you, how do you view like kind of the capital in Hartford? Like, what is kind of where do you think it's at in terms of, is financial capital the biggest hurdle right now, or is it talent, or is it cultural? Like, where do you think we are in Hartford at this point?
Yeah, so we're moving along, I think, on all of those different vectors, to steal a phrase from Ian, right? Pretty well. Of course, there's always more work to be done, and there's more improvement to be had, right? To create that perfect set of circumstances. I think what I'm most impressed by is that the conversation around financial capital used to be one that I would kind of leave most of the time kind of observing that there was like a fundamental kind of difference between the level of readiness that most of the entrepreneurs in Hartford thought that they had, and their ability to gain that capital. So I think that one of the pieces of progress that we're making is that local entrepreneurs and people who are here are much more aware of the things that it takes and the milestones that they need to reach in order to be ready for that capital. So there's no more of that mismatched expectation of them thinking that they're all they need is $1 million and they'll be all set. And the folks who have that $1 million saying, oh no, what you need is a whole bunch of other things before you get to that $1 million, so you don't burn it and completely combust. So I think that is kind of moving in the right direction, and that there are pockets of money that are evolving and emerging for this, and we're seeing people use it wisely. In terms of the institutional and the cultural capital, it's moving along as well. People are kind of emerging and saying, I want to be a part of this. This is exciting. I have a perspective to be able to contribute. And even if, I'm not going to be financially compensated for that, I want to be able to provide this person who I think is capable of doing really great things with this little nugget that they need to know in order to not crash and burn. And there's kind of a recognition that when you get into the ecosystem, whatever your ambitions are for where that will take you, it will emerge at the right time. So there's like less pressure on every single interaction and transaction to be able to result in something that has immediate gain for both sides. So I think that's like the kind of most special thing that's happening right now is that Hartford's incredibly small, tight-knit community is realizing the power of working together and seeing where those things go, instead of being wed to interactions for a certain outcome. And I think that the more that we're able to do that and practice that, the healthier our community will become overall, and the more interesting things that will kind of result of it. And those conversations, I think people are becoming more patient about the outcome as well. Like conversations early with investors may not result in a check that afternoon or that week, which may have been the expectation before, right? I need the money and I need the money now. People are realizing that those conversations evolve over time. And just like you and me, we'll see the same people over and over again in multiple different roles within our community over the course of several years. And it's that familiarity, it's that kind of track record of connection and that trust that comes as a result of that will result at the right way of being able to work with one another and support one another at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there has to be a network of trust to know that if we go ahead on an idea or a project, like we're all going to be able to go through with it and so forth. And you are right. It's the expectation of the interactions. Definitely a few years back, I need to close it today. Like if we don't do something today, then it's not going to ever work out and the whole world's going to go to, turnover. So definitely people are a little bit more patient, and sometimes patience is what you need. Laila, so talking about cultural capital, dealing sometimes with institutions and corporate clients, sometimes it's hard to mesh like a startup kind of culture and kind of like that fast pace with the corporate culture. How has that been with Stanley? Do you have to explain the culture that you're trying to kind of match them up with, or is it just ingrained at this point?
So I think each corporation has their own culture, sort of the same way startups even have their own culture. So I wouldn't even say that startups are all the same either. I think there's a range as well. And I think that at the end of the day, it kind of goes back to the first theme we talked about, which is connection and engagement. When people kind of get together and there is more beyond just that engagement about business, that personal relationship is built, I think it's really an important way to start any kind of opportunity. I think that a lot of times it really has to do with the notion of what is it that both parties come to the table to try to accomplish. And so I try very hard to filter out people who are just there, who are sort of for the petting zoo. So, you know, the companies that want to go past each other kind of in the petting zoo and sort of see what's going on, which by the way has its place. I'm not saying that's not necessarily an important piece of the startup innovation culture, but I try to really look at opportunities where someone can actually add value. And really, when I set the stage in any meeting and say, we're here to discuss this because, you know, this group might want to do X and Y. I mean, that's kind of, it's as simplistic as that. And that's kind of blocking and tackling. Within that is the underlying assumption that both parties are doers, that they want to actually accomplish something. And I see that as being one of the most important aspects of culture. What you see with entrepreneurs is that they're doers. You know, you might not give them, you know, financial capital, you might not give them all sorts of assets, but they're going to go do something. It's just kind of the way their DNA is wired. And when you look at a corporation that is very well run, like Stanley is, with metrics of success and ways to think about integrating innovation in a very kind of open-minded, but at the same time disciplined manner, it is that mindset of, I want to accomplish something out of this meeting. I realize, and this is where you have to set the expectations for corporations, that when you deal with early stage companies, not every meeting is productive. Not every meeting is going to hit on all cylinders. And so that's the expectations that you're setting at the large corporate side. And on the other side, you're setting expectations to the startup. Things don't move as quickly as you like. You know, maybe you don't get a check written in a week, but you certainly have an opportunity to engage. And maybe you don't even get a pilot or a proof of concept, but you have access to spend some time with a domain expert and understand better what you should be building. And so the importance of listening and engaging and just being open to whatever comes out of the conversation is what I try to set in those engagements. And then everyone walks away saying, okay, I got something out of this. And they'll come with an open mind the next time around. And that's how I think the culture begins to be more productive in those engagements.
Cool. So first off, I know we're coming up kind of towards the end of the hour. Anybody that's in our audience, if you have any questions, please put them in there. We will get to them as they pop up. So again, just please, we'd love some interaction with you. And so there's, you know, being in these types of ecosystems, sometimes we hear the same words and same phrases and so forth, but they may not be necessarily the right terms to be used. And the reason why I bring that up is the distinguish between a startup community and an entrepreneurial ecosystem, or a startup ecosystem and so forth. Ian, can you just go into a little bit about how you kind of distinguish between those? Because once we get into systems thinking, and there's systems within systems, you know, on top of systems, how are those different in your mind?
Yeah, so as you said, Eric, there are, you know, within let's talk about a geography. Within a city, there are systems within systems, right? And we lay this out in the book by talking about startup community, an entrepreneurial ecosystem, an innovation ecosystem, an economy, a society. That's a generalization. There's a whole lot more going on. But this was a response to, you know, really what motivated us to actually pivot the entire mission of our book, which was to put it around systems. And about this disconnect, right? We hear there's so much of this disconnect, right? The entrepreneurs and the people working with entrepreneurs on a full-time basis versus all these other ecosystem actors. One of my observations has been that it's almost antagonistic at times, right? Like, why don't they just get it, right? We get it, they don't get it. And that's not the case. It's that, okay, we've talked about different organizational forms. We talk about, you know, networks in startups. We talk about hierarchies in corporates, for example. It's different incentive structures as well. Like, that's massively been missing from the discussion. It's not that one group's incapable. It's just that they're responding to those organizational structures and incentives and the people involved. And so the most simplified way I can talk about this is that, you know, systems have three major components. There are more, but the three major components are the parts, the interdependencies between the parts and the purpose. And for a startup community, which we view as kind of the beating heart of entrepreneurship in a city, in a place, in an entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is a broader construct, these are different, right? The actors are different, the way they're engaging is different, and the fundamental purpose is different. So I'll start with the end. The fundamental purpose for us of a startup community is to help entrepreneurs succeed, and that's it, nothing more. An entrepreneurial ecosystem can be a bunch of different things. If you're a corporate actor, it could be, I don't know, maybe you're looking for companies to invest in through your corporate venture fund. Maybe you're looking for, you're looking for proof of concept, like startups to come in and help you co-create things and new innovations. If you're a government, it's maybe job creation, right? Like this is always a huge friction between a lot of the entrepreneurial support actors in a community, that their metrics are about job creation in order to get funding, which is, of course, the entirely the wrong metric for them. Like their metric is, are these programs actually helping entrepreneurs succeed? And so there's this huge disconnect. And so this just kind of explains why people are executing on these different missions, right? And so that's why things become more complex. And so just to simplify things for us, the startup community is about the group of individuals, and I want to stress individuals over organizations, that are coming together to help entrepreneurs succeed. There's another component of this, which is that it's larger than just network connectivity. The incentives, the motivations are not just economic. In fact, they're usually not economic at all. It's a sort of kinship, right? I don't use the word family, but it's a sense of identity, right? Common purpose. And as we move further out on that, like kind of Russian nesting doll version of a society, economy, innovation ecosystem, entrepreneurial ecosystem, it just gets more complex. And so we felt like because of that, it was just really important to explain, not just to get the terminology right, but really to explain that these are fundamentally different things, different people responding in different ways.
So what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but startup communities are more bottom up versus anything, and maybe entrepreneurial ecosystems are a little bit more top down or more focused on like scale up type of growth companies. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. And in fact, I think that a lot of what goes on in entrepreneurial ecosystems are top down phenomena that are dressed up in bottom up language, right? They're not actually bottom up. And that's okay. That's the whole point of this, is to say these are different things. Understanding these differences can help us then navigate them more effectively.
So Michelle, just on that thread of like bottom up and so forth, is that what are some of the things that you've seen over the past years that have been these bottom up initiatives or kind of programs that are now kind of leading kind of what's happening in Hartford?
Yeah, so in full transparency, like Launch Hartford was created out of a top-down kind of approach that was seeded by the Connecticut State Legislature, because the thesis there was that a healthy innovation ecosystem would help to reinforce and grow our economy in ways that we were desperately kind of lacking as a state. So it is those revenue numbers, those job creation numbers that I'm responsible for in all of the things that we do. And like the way that Ian was talking about those different incentive or motivation structures rings true for me, because the corporations that are a part of the work that we do have their own reasons for being here, right? The higher ed institutions that are a part of this ecosystem have their own reasons for being here. They want to be able to tout the fact that if top talent decides to come to their university instead of another one in a different location, they'll be able to have access to this thriving community where they can get internships and they can learn from entrepreneurs, and they can get supported if they are an entrepreneur, and all of these different types of things. They want to create the relationships with the corporates so that their job placement numbers are better when the talent graduates. And so one of the things that I've been really trying to be deliberate about doing is just having everybody surface their motivations up front and say, okay, it's enlightened self-interest as long as it's communicated across the board, that's going to get us to where we want to go, rather than having to pretend that we're doing this for some sort of altruistic reason that's not going to fit with what is going to actually provide value for any of the different actors within the ecosystem, right? So for the higher ed community to say, this is why we're doing it, for the corporations to say, we have this challenge in the marketplace, and in order to stay relevant, we need to be able to get better at data analytics, integrate IoT, and have AI and ML provide us with new information about our potential population of insured, so we can make better risk assessment decisions, right? And we need our community organizations to say, look, like, our youth is struggling to be able to have any sort of great well-paying job opportunity as they're going forward. So we need them to be able to plug into the innovation economy and be exposed to it. So, I think it's when people get comfortable talking with one another about those things at that level that we're actually able to unlock the opportunity to be able to find those magic points where the motivations intersect in a really healthy way, or at least both parties are confident about what they're going to be able to get out of it, and they don't have to apologize about it to each other. So that's kind of been the last 3 years of just kind of surfacing that. And I think as a result, the community of entrepreneurs is relaxing a little bit more and just saying, okay, like, I get it. Maybe it's not a group of people that are building this for the same reasons that we're building it or we want it to be built, but at least I know where they're operating from, and can navigate in ways that they feel a lot more comfortable, rather than feeling like they've got to like rail against it in some sort of way or feel like it's inauthentic to their needs.
That I really like that. I really like that, because sometimes people think of like talking about your intentions and what you're trying to get out of it is like a negative thing, like you're trying to get something over on somebody else. But it's just like being open and honest and transparent of, these are our what we're looking to get done, and this is how we can work with each other, right? Yeah. So that's definitely a good insight from you. So we got a question, and I'd love anybody to kind of hop in on this. So I'm in a small community and I'm struggling to find other entrepreneurs. How can I make connections and help grow a startup community? So one, I would say I would love to hear kind of the generic version, Ian or Laila, and then Michelle, if you want to kind of ping some stuff in Hartford that maybe people that are in that same position can kind of reach out to. So
I'd say that it's interesting with the COVID that a lot of these things have gone online. So that I think you can actually do more online than you would probably have done in the past. The great way to intersect is things like meetups. Look for special interest groups in areas that you have industry interest in. That's a terrific way to just engage, because then you're looking, you may not necessarily find your counterpart CEO, founder there, but you'll find people in that industry, and eventually it might lead you to finding others. I think that the kinds of efforts that Michelle's doing, there's some really terrific resources on her website about, again, community events. I'd encourage anyone to start just attending them. And very often trade organizations have, informational information that informational kind of panels and evening events. And you kind of begin to see that there's some startups that are in those satellites. So those are some kind of blocking and tackling way of doing it in a way that you'll also have kind of commonality in what to discuss.
Yeah, I think for me, just some simple things is, making yourself known, right? That this can be everything from like start blogging, start, initiating events, really simple things. Like one effective thing I've seen in so many places is Open Coffee Club. Obviously in this context of COVID, that has to be online. But if everyone knows that every Tuesday at 8 a.m., we're going to have a cup of coffee together and just, interact and talk about entrepreneurship and our problems, like that's a known thing that can then become a resource attractor. Who knows what comes out of that? Also, being in a smaller place, it's about creating aggregation with maybe adjacent communities as well as larger cities that are nearby, bringing that network into your network. So it's just a lot of that. Just try a bunch of different things. Try to be a source of, I guess we would call this in systems like an attractor, trying to bring people into this and giving them a focal point of contact.
Yeah, and then just a shameless plug. I don't know where this person is tuning in from, but if they're in the state of Connecticut or proximate to the city of Hartford at all, please take a look at launchinhartford.com. We're trying to put out as many opportunities for events and connection points for people across the community as possible. And think outside of the box. I think, networks are developed in layers. And that was certainly my experience here. So Eric, you're running a startup weekend this weekend at a Sacred Heart University. One of the best things that I ever did was sort of take a chance to show up at a startup weekend about 8 years ago in the city of Hartford. And I didn't have an idea. I didn't really know what skill set that I could lend to it, but I knew that I wanted to be around other entrepreneurs. So I jumped on a team and we figured it out over the course of the weekend. And I ran into people there that then became, part of my network, and their network kind of unfolded as a result. So be willing to try something new. I think if every event that I go to, I at least find someone that I want to follow up with. If it's just one person out of 40 conversations, if it's just one person that I want to follow up with and have a better kind of engagement with or a long lasting relationship, that's a victory for me. So I don't count the 39 that, may not apply to me. I count the one that's going to be better than what I had going into it. So if we adopt that sort of attitude and you're around here, good things will happen. And I'd love to help connect that audience member with folks that I'm a part of in the community here in Hartford.
Yep, the idea of quality over quantity. Sometimes you don't necessarily need as many people, you just need a few good ones that kind of drive it forward. And so also to that point, I will add in that part of the idea of startup communities back in the day was the idea of you can take ownership of it and you can give yourself permission to go start something, right? And say, hey, I'm going to do something for this community. I'm going to, put up that open coffee club. I'm honestly a perfect example of that. I about 5 years ago started a podcast called CT Startup. And literally was the idea of it was, and I started with another service provider, Dave Menard of North Carolina. And it was just about to connect other people and just have conversations, because we knew that if you just knew about other people in the ecosystem, what they're doing, that is going to just open up doors, right? And it has opened up doors for many people, some people on the podcast, for myself and for others. So that is something where just doing that, nobody gave us permission. We just did it, and it's led to some awesome interactions. So again, just pick yourself, give yourself permission to go do it, and be an active participant. So we are coming up on kind of the end of the hour. And so I kind of have a question for each of you to kind of set the stage for what you've been doing and so forth. And so in terms of startup communities and kind of thinking about it and somebody trying to go into a community to do work, Ian, what are some kind of key takeaways would you, or kind of models of thinking would you have somebody think of or kind of work through?
Well, assuming you're not harmful to the startup community, everyone has something to offer. I cannot be more clear about this. You do not have to be the entrepreneur, stereotype, hacker bro, whatever. Don't let the mystique of a startup community keep you from participating. We all have something to offer, whether you've ever worked with an entrepreneur, been an entrepreneur, worked at a startup. Sometimes what entrepreneurs need most is just an empathetic ear. And actually, let me take that back. Most of the time, they need someone with an empathetic ear who has lived a life, who has experiences. One of the key ingredients of complexity is that we need diversity. Diversity means variety. Some of the best insights, I'm sure Laila could talk about this, come from in the context of an accelerator, they come from companies that have really no knowledge of the sector you're working on, right? And so the more combinations we have, the more innovations we have. And so you have something to contribute. The easiest way to plug in is to show up, to listen, engage with people, find ways to help. Mentorship is an amazing, whether it's formal or informal mentorship is an amazing way to do that. But believe me, just being authentic and being helpful, you'll eventually figure it out, but you've got to show up first in order to understand where the unmet needs are.
That is great. And kind of, Laila, on that point, for people who are in corporations that like a Stanley, that can kind of have a big influence on an ecosystem and do work with them, and they want to get started, what are some advice and kind of some what would you say to those types of people that want to kind of bring something or connect to an ecosystem from a corporate standpoint?
It's really what Ian just said. Just show up, right? And really listen and think about it. And just to sort of add on to the point about, different unrelated industries or entrepreneurs sometimes intersecting in cool ways. I'll give one really tangible example. Vision Systems started in manufacturing because they're really expensive and they were doing defect detection. They then jumped into gaming. The Xbox brought it into a kind of the mobile gaming device used when you're playing with the Xbox, which dropped the cost, but then put it into the iPhone for a three-dimensional photo, comes back, $5,000 down to, dollars per chip. And that transforms back into the robotics industry and the manufacturing. So you see things moving all sorts of different ways, volumes and other things change. Going down at the ecosystem down in South America, when we sent down Carlos to start the ecosystem, he started with what's there, right? And it was a bunch of big manufacturers, lots of, capacity. Okay, so what can we use that capacity for? So just go, listen, be open-minded, think in ways that may not be linear, and just have fun.
That's great. So Michelle, thinking about the future, thinking about kind of your vision to make Hartford the #1 city on the East Coast for business and for people to be here. What are some of the strengths that Hartford needs to double down on, going into the future? And what are some of the weaknesses that us as a community can kind of rise up and maybe get to be one of our strengths?
Yeah, so the things that I think we need practice at as a community are just really being open to experimentation and the many different consequences that can come as a result of that experimentation. So sometimes you shake things up and you win. Sometimes you shake things up and it does not turn out the way that you want it to. And, I think that there's still a little bit of a feeling of, being branded either a winner or a loser in this community, because we're so small and tight knit and people know each other. People tend to kind of form an opinion about the last thing that they know that person doing. And so I'd love to see us get better at kind of understanding that the last thing that somebody did doesn't necessarily mean it's the best predictor of the next thing that somebody's going to do. And that there's many probably reasons for their success or failure beyond who they are as a person, how hard they tried, or their ability to add value to what's going on next. So that's like the #1 thing that I'd like to really try to work on as a community. But in terms of like the strengths that we can double down on, I think that it's the other side of that same coin. The fact that we all are incredibly connected and we know each other and we can think of each other as resources for the things that we want to do. I've said this time and time again. I wrote a blog post about it to kick off the startup week in Hartford, but our size is an advantage. The fact that we're smaller than other places that are trying to do this, that you don't get lost in this community, and that you can kind of make a name for yourself and develop great networks really, really quickly, is something that we need to reinforce, and we need to practice that much better. If we can all recognize our ability, as I kind of led off with, to help impact the rest of the community around us with the things that we choose to do, and the ways in which we try to interact with each other, I think that we'll continue to see really explosive growth in the size of our innovation ecosystem and the results that come from it. So I'm excited about what's next.
That is a wonderful answer. And when you're talking about the idea of not looking at the past failure and looking at that as not necessarily what the future is going to hold, that hits true. That is something that as entrepreneurs, sometimes you don't want to kind of share about that because you feel, you have your ego and so forth. But it's one of the things about, and this, it's the people that get back up and get back in the game, right? It's you get back into the game and say, I'm gonna try again and I'm gonna do something else. So thank you for for that insight and so forth. So, we're at the end of the hour. This was a great panel. I really feel honored to be able to kind of, again, bring this full circle with the past few years and kind of with my journey as an entrepreneur in this ecosystem and seeing everything happen. Ian, great book. I learned a lot from it and still kind of pulling some stuff out of it. Laila, it's been great, kind of, again, from the Techstars standpoint of also being kind of in this. I really appreciate it. And Michelle, great job with the effort that you put in and kind of the persistence, because as you know, it hasn't always been easy. And but the thing is that you've always gotten back into the game and kept going. So I applaud you on that.
Thank you. Nothing worth doing is ever easy at the beginning, right? So we just got to keep at it. And while we're saying thank yous, I know this is like kind of the last formal part of Startup Week. I just want to have a huge shout out and thank you to the entire Techstars team. That includes the folks that work for Techstars and the track captains that came together from our community to organize an amazing, amazing week. We're grateful to you for everything that you've done and look forward to working with you again very soon for what's next. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.